Alright, in this video I'm going to show how to mount some hood pins. And in this case, this is a Dodge Ram that I've put a carbon fiber hood on. You can see a little bit of that original carbon fiber color peeking out of there. When you have aftermarket carbon fiber or fiberglass hoods, it's recommended that you have a secondary way of keeping that hood down. In this case, I'm maintaining my OE latch, and then I'm going to add a couple of hood pins. Now, there's a number of options when it comes to hood pins. These are two kind of higher end options. These ones from Ring Brothers, which really make great products. Pretty beefy aluminum, anodized aluminum, come in a box like that. Those are called their Defiant ones. And I like these. They're not super low profile though. They stick up a bit, and pretty big pieces here, which I plan to use on a different project, the El Camino project. But in this case, I'm going to use something a little more subtle, and these are a quick latch. These ones are minis, so these would not be designed to hold that hood down without the OE latch in place or without other mechanisms. These are only designed to be backup, but they're pretty great design. And there are some generic versions, so just kind of be careful what you purchase. These ones run about $30-ish a piece. I've seen packs of 3 on multiple websites going for just a little more than 100, but they're pretty cool. This part just goes right inside there like that, holds it, and then it even has the ability to kind of be on a little bit of an angle, and then to release you just push the button there. And there's about $250-ish for these hood pins, so those ones pretty expensive. Now they do get quite a bit cheaper. You can get them as cheap as about $15-20, but keep in mind those might look pretty crummy after a short period of time with oxidation and road wear and tear, etc. I think these will hold up a little bit better. But in any case, next step is to identify where you're going to put those, and spending a lot of time to make sure you got the correct placement is, I think, really important. Now, most of the time, hood pins are going to be just mounted right on the radiator support, which is right there. And when I marked that to see where it would come out on the top of the hood to see what it would look like, it's clear back here, which to me just doesn't look quite right. And keeping in mind the grill actually adds a little extra length onto this hood, so I wanted it more forward. So I welded on my own brackets here, and I do have a separate video to show how I went about that. And I did that because I wanted them to be in the right location, or the best possible looking location. And I just thought this looked kind of awkward being all the way back there. So I think it's important to use sort of visualization techniques when you're doing placement like that. So I just put these on here and then kind of step back and see how they look. And again, even though I'm not using these ones, they're nice representation of what that's going to look like. And I would say, this is a hood I spent quite a bit of time painting and prepping, and I actually do have a separate video on that online already, so check that out if you're interested. But I would say, most of the time they say kind of measure twice, cut once, or drill once. This situation, measure like 20 times, look at it another 20 times, and make sure you know exactly what you're doing before you go ahead and drill, because there isn't much leeway there. So I've actually marked the outer portion where I expect those to be, measured from center line to make sure they're symmetric, and then I will also just sort of verify that from the bottom side. And a nice way to do that, and I've seen this on other videos, but you take your hood pin, and once it's mounted, you can take a little bit of black, like a permanent marker, a paint marker, something like that, and put some tape up there, and then close the hood, and that paint will transfer from there to that to the hood, and then you can see exactly where that's going to line up. Okay, so just making sure you're extra thorough. And I often say, like, if you've got something that's really important, use multiple data points. So I'm not only measuring with respect to center line and putting marks there, but I'm also going to use this method. I'm just going to really make sure that everything is in the correct location before I go ahead and drill. Okay? All right, so let's move on to drilling, marking, and everything else. All right, so I'm midway through making all the measurements just to really check and make sure everything's in the right spot. And you can see when I bring the hood down with that ink on the top of the pin, it leaves a nice mark there. And then once I'm absolutely certain everything's exactly where I want it, I'll go ahead and drill those. I do recommend a small drill bit, just because if you do potentially make a mistake within reasonable limits, you can correct that. As long as it's not outside the diameter of that piece, meaning like a eighth to a quarter inch, I think you can account for. So small pilot hole followed by a little bit bigger bit, or honestly like a step drill bit's good. I would recommend one that's a little more narrow like this, so you're making smaller changes at a time, because if you go too big with your diameter, you can end up exceeding the diameter of that flange, and then you're really stuck then with maybe using a different pin that has a bigger diameter, or otherwise repairing your hood. So something like this actually works really well. I less prefer a hole saw, just because I feel like they're not quite as accurate with this job, but these work really well. And then when you decide what diameter you want to drill to, I'd actually mark it with ink, so that way or tape, so you make absolute certain you do not go past what you actually want. Okay? Alright, so now I got my pilot holes drilled, and one little tip I'd give, so let the drill do the work. On this one, I was kind of pushing a little harder than I should, and you can see how when it poked through, it actually damaged some of the paint. We should be totally fine because that's well within the diameter of that pin. However, on this side where I did let the drill sort of do the work, you can see how much cleaner that looks. Okay, so just be a little bit careful as you're drilling there. I'll kind of recheck all my measurements, and then I will go and increase the diameter of those holes to what I need for the hood pins. Alright, you can see this one's drilled out just the right size there. You want it to be snug but still fit. And on this one here, I'm getting pretty close. And you kind of creep up on it. You don't want to go too far, right? You can always take a little more off. And I found that something like this little sandpaper on a die grinder is a pretty gentle way to kind of creep up on that. Makes it a little less likely that some of that paint is going to flake, like you can kind of see right there, just a tiny bit. It'll all get covered up by that, but still, ideally, you wouldn't have that. And honestly, I think if I had this to do over again, I would fit the hood, drill those out, and then paint the hood. I think that would be a better way to do it. But in any case, making it work. Just go slow with the drill and kind of gentle pressure, so you don't end up, again, trying to wreck your finish there. Okay? All right, now I got the outer holes pretty well finished up, and you can see how that pin lines up pretty well there. This structure in there has a little bit of thickness to it, about a quarter inch. And then on the bottom side, I have to open that up a little bit to be able to allow access to that nut. So basically the back side of this. For that, I am going to use a hole saw. And, you know, I want to be kind of careful because as this pilot drill comes through, I don't want that to damage anything. And it shouldn't, because it should line up here, but just be kind of mindful. Just like in general, anytime you're drilling, be mindful of what your drill is about to go through. Just like here, where actually it could have potentially damaged my intercooler by going down a little too far. Just kind of nicked it a little bit, which is no big deal, but be mindful of what's on the back side of what you're drilling. Okay? All right, well, to get those drilled out, and we should be ready to fit those up. All right, so on this hood, just because there's actually 2 layers here, and when using these quick latches, you can see there's actually some space there. On this part, it's pretty firm, but over here, it's kind of squishy. So what I actually did, I'll show you on the other side, I used some carbon reinforced filler and put it in there just to kind of fill that space a little bit. You know, this is what I used, but panel bonding adhesive or other things would probably work just fine. That's just to keep those 2 panels from squishing down too much and distorting or potentially cracking the paint as I go ahead and tighten this nut onto the actual quick latch fastener. Okay, so I'm in the final stage of installation here. I just want to show one little tip here that I had. So I actually took just a little bit thin strip of painter's tape like that, or you know, duct tape, whatever would work. Just a tiny little gasket there, just to keep that metal edge from rubbing on the paint. Not a totally necessary situation, but I thought to do that. And in addition, on the you know, I showed how I used a little bit of filler inside of there to help provide some support, and it actually firmed it up pretty well. Now, I mean, filler is not a structural substance, and you know, really shouldn't be used for that, but it does resist compression pretty well. Now, the only thing though is filler is porous, so we don't want that to take on moisture and expand, because that could lead to cracking and other things. So I'll put a really thin coat of paint on there just to protect it a little bit. And then I'll go ahead and paint my hood pin mounts there, and then we'll get this installed for final time. All right, so getting ready to paint those areas. I used a little bit of lacquer thinner to clean off any kind of greases or anything like that. And then I'll use a primer, and then just a little Rust-Oleum, just a little black paint. Doesn't have to be super fancy. Just make sure you cover up the things you don't want to overspray on. And then for the hood, I definitely do not want to overspray on that. So I'm just going to use an acid brush just to get in that opening. That should actually work pretty good. And I'll probably approach it from the bottom, that way I don't accidentally get any paint on the hood. Although if you do wipe that off pretty quickly, it'll be fine. Okay. All right, now those areas are all painted. Not perfect, but look pretty good. And I'm gonna go ahead and install these for the last time. Now I do recommend using a little bit of thread sealer. I want to say the website recommended you use the green stuff, which kind of creeps in after it's all installed, but I see no reason why you can't just put a little bit of that on up front. Now, I found 26 millimeter socket works pretty good. Just one thing to be careful of when you're installing this. So if your hood's a little like mine where you have 2 layers in there, just be very careful that you don't lose that inside the hood somewhere. Might be retrievable, but could be a challenge. So I'll go ahead and get this in there, and we'll see what it looks like when it's all final. All right, now those hood pins are installed, and I think they look pretty nice. They're pretty streamlined, kind of like how low profile they are. Now, all of the quick latch hood pins, regardless of size, on their website does recommend that you use them with an alternate securing mechanism like the original equipment hood latch or something like that. And in doing that, I did realize there's just a little bit of finesse it takes to open and close the hood then, because you have to basically be able to get that latch, the original equipment latch, to latch simultaneously with these. So you got to adjust them pretty well, so it takes a little bit of time to do that. But also you may have to actually put just a little bit of downward pressure on the hood to get these to unlatch. So it just takes a little bit of finesse, unlike I think the traditional hood pins, which would be a little bit easier to use in that way. But again, you take the pros with the cons, and the pro is these things super low profile comparatively. So pretty happy with them overall. Let me know if any questions, comments. Really appreciate all that, and thanks for checking out the video. Please like and subscribe.